Okay. Thank you very much. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I just wanted to come back to a point that Mr. Jessop made right at the start, which was to say if you were to measure success based on levels of uncertainty, then we're in a pretty disastrous situation. I think that's, I'm paraphrasing, but you in essence said it doesn't look good from the point of view of uncertainty. A big factor in the uncertainty conversation is this issue of a blindfolded Brexit. So that the political declaration will not be legally binding and could therefore be a very vague and nebulous document which in essence doesn't really give us much clarity when it comes to the meaningful vote. And of course that massively ratchets up the level of uncertainty. The more vague the political declaration is, the less certainty there is for business, for citizens, and for the country at large and for ourselves. So that said, what's your view on what the Prime Minister's official spokesperson said the day before yesterday, which was that there will be no withdrawal agreement unless, and I quote, there are precise guarantees in the political declaration that there will be a frictionless trading relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union post-Brexit. Do you think that statement from the Prime Minister's spokesman will help to increase certainty levels? And indeed, it was confirmed from the dispatch box by Dominic Raab that is the government's position. So just interested in your thoughts on the uncertainty question in the light of that statement.
Well, first, a general point on the uncertainty question. Although the degree of uncertainty is clearly very high, it's actually quite encouraging how well the economy has continued to perform. We can argue about how strong growth would have been without the vote to leave the EU, but the bottom line is the economy has continued to grow at a fairly healthy pace. There's been some uncertainty holding back investment for sure, but the unemployment rate has continued to fall and so on and so on. So although there is a high degree of uncertainty, I'm actually quite reassured by the fact that the economy seems to be continuing pretty much as normal. And I think that's a reflection of the way that most people outside the Westminster and the Whitehall bubble view these things. Businesses certainly will deal with whatever they are given. If that's an increase in frictions, that's what businesses do. They can deal with frictions. Consumers will deal with whatever is thrown at them as well. So I wouldn't overplay the importance of uncertainty. But undoubtedly there is too much at the moment. It does need to be clarified. I'd rather not comment specifically on what individual politicians or their spokesmen have said. I mean, the IA is non-political. I will just make a general point that for us, the process of Brexit has always been about a series of trade-offs. You'll be familiar with our Plan A+. One of the criticisms we had of the current process is it always seems to be about the UK and the EU. It's not thinking about the broader dimensions, including trade with the rest of the world. So when you talk about the importance of maintaining frictionless trade with the EU, I don't think that can be the be-all and end-all of that process. If it were, by the way, we should join the euro tomorrow, because that would lower frictions in trade with the EU even further. So it can't just be about that. We have to recognise there are other parts. So just as the euro is a point about the independence of monetary policy and other commitments you might make to members, similarly, leaving the EU is about regaining independence on trade policy and regulatory policy. Most sensible Brexiteers, and I think I include myself as one of those, would accept that there will be an increase in trade frictions with the EU as a result of us leaving, even under a Canada plus deal. The challenge is to minimise those frictions in such a way that doesn't also limit the potential upsides from leaving. And that's where I think the Chequers plan in particular falls short. Our own plan and several others would do a lot better.
Thank you very much. Ms Rutter, just wondering your perspective from government, because our whole posture on these negotiations has been that there'll be a legally binding international treaty for the withdrawal agreement, and the political declaration will be a non-binding statement of intent. But the Prime Minister's statement, or Prime Minister's spokesman, was the same thing, seems to have utterly turned that on its head, because it seems now that the political declaration must contain precise guarantees of frictionless trade, meaning at least, I guess, as frictionless as it currently is, as a precondition for the withdrawal agreement to be finalised. Do you think that's caused confusion in government, or is that?
I can't speak for whether it's caused confusion in government. I'm not hardwired into the people doing the negotiation. I think the Prime Minister's always had a calculation to make about how much precision is helpful in the political declaration. I know the former Secretary of State was very much of the view that if you were going to persuade people who might be reluctant to vote for the withdrawal agreement, including the financial settlement, you needed to have basically nailed down as much as you could have done on the future relationship. But of course, the EU's always made clear, it makes clear in its guidelines that its position can evolve if the UK's position evolves. So whatever is in that political declaration could change if circumstances in the UK's preferences moved, whether it's on freedom of movement, on the European Court of Justice and things like that. So that would be possible, I think, after the political declaration. Monsieur Barnier can always go back for revised guidelines if things change. That was in the EU guidelines in March. I think what is difficult is, I think it's almost impossible, as far as I can see it, for the EU to allow language about frictionless trade, because the EU has always been, I thought, clear, looks at Simon, that, frictionless trade, as the EU defines it at least, means being within the single market and the customs union. We produced a report last year saying if you want frictionless trade as now, you have to be in the single market and the customs union. Those are the two bits of architecture that give you frictionless trade. Move away from those and inevitably you have a bit of additional friction. You can minimise it through facilitation agreements, smart technology, conformity assessment, a whole bunch of things, bits of mutual recognition maybe, but basically there will be added friction. So I would find it very difficult, very interesting if the Prime Minister gets words saying frictionless trade as opposed to as frictionless as possible, which is more often the formulation. We had a long time when we were talking about exact same benefits. I think it's still one of Sir Keir Starmer's 6 tests, is whether a deal offers the exact same benefits. I think one of the things that the Irish backstop experience shows us is that it really is quite important, even if you go for sort of more expansive language, that both sides really understand what each other means by it, because I think you don't want to have another sort of going through of, well, that's not what we meant by the language that we put into the political declaration. So I would hope that the one thing people are clear when we get the political declaration is both have the same understanding of what it means about the field within which we're negotiating, because I would have thought otherwise those negotiations get off to a much more difficult start. But Simon's much more experienced in negotiating than I am.
Would you like to add anything, Mr. Fraser?
Well, my view on, I don't like the term frictionless trade because, what is it? It's just so vague. It doesn't really help us. It doesn't help us at all. So it's one of those things that I'd like us to get away from and have more specificity. But what we're talking about is trying to maintain the freest possible flow of trade and access to markets between the UK and the EU, whether you are in favour of Brexit or against it. That is one of your objectives. I think the Prime Minister, if I may say so, my personal reading of the Prime Minister's spokesman's statement was that it was largely directed at a domestic audience in view of things that were being said around her over the weekend and on Monday, because it seems to me that the strategy that we are taking towards this whole process is one that is dependent on a degree of constructive ambiguity in the political framework. That's why we're having the political framework non-binding in order to be a platform for the launch of the second negotiation. So I think that we will be seeking language in that framework which sets out principles which both sides agree should underpin the future relationship, but which won't give specificity on the